Imagine a society where the monarch just died and all hell broke loose in the ensuing power vacuum. Food production is completely out the window, and the former aristocracy have reorganized the populace into a massive cannibalistic cult. Now imagine you just waltzed into their territory seeking fellow anti-monarchic revolutionaries. Yep, that's me. My name's Jack, this is Hammer, and these are the rest of the converts to my new ideology called Neo-Hivism, which basically means we eat the rich. But not literally. Anyways, there appears to be a city poking up out of the mist up ahead, so we'd better get there quick before we end up as a 5-course meal. Hopefully, we'll be able to find more converts for our new hive and acquire the capital we need to defeat capitalism. We arrived safely at the city gates, and the guards made short work of our pursuers. This was the city of Mongrel, a haven for societal outcasts and weirdos. Which, I'll be honest, is what we were. And we were immediately approached by one of them, who introduced himself as Beep. Well, seeing as we came here looking for smooth brains, fertile minds for our cause, we decided to let him join us. The fact that he didn't even know what money was made him even better, for our goal was eventually to establish a cashless and classless society. Our partners in this endeavor, the Shinobi Thieves, had a foothold in town, so we used their facilities to continue training our recruits. Then, using what capital we had previously acquired, we bought some property in town. It was a bit of a fixer-upper, not gonna lie, but fortunately there was a building materials shop right next door, so we had what we needed to get it going. The first thing we assembled was a research station so we could draft some building plans. However, it is a bit hard to think straight when your neighbors keep strolling in uninvited looking to consume your flesh, so we decided to go out and teach them some manners. Now, to an outsider, going out and kicking the snot out of a bunch of naked homeless people might look a little out of line with our goal of creating a utopian society, but these people did break my concentration, so cry me a river. How about you try staying focused while hordes of lunatics are outside your house howling at the moon all night long? Anyways, using my highly developed brain, I began researching everything I could think of that we would need to establish our new hive. Meanwhile, Hammer and Razor prevented the cannibals from reaching our doorstep. Then at a certain point, Hammer discovered that the people of Mongrel were willing to pay good money for the heads of the cannibal princes. And I know capitalism is bad and all, but look, the thing you gotta understand is that it takes a certain amount of capital to get Neo-Hivism going. That's just the way it is. And that's how we decided to become professional headhunters. Or we attempted to, anyways. Well, I'm gonna be honest, aside from Razor, we were actually pretty bad fighters. Now don't get me wrong, Hammer could endure an absolute beating that would make anyone else quit, but it was gonna take more than that to start bringing back heads with any kind of frequency. And so I began researching how to build up our strength, tirelessly poring through old fitness magazines in the small hours of the night, until at last we managed to build our home gymnasium, training dummies and dumbbells for days. And the nice thing about being hivers is that we don't really require that much protein to sustain our skinny frames. At the same time, I began training in the art of the silent takedown. After all, the easiest way to win a fight is to completely rig the odds in your favor. And when I got good enough, I started practicing on live targets. Which probably wasn't the wisest idea I've ever had, but you can't expect real progress without a little risk. Eventually, I progressed to the point where I could knock people out from a distance. Don't ask me how, trade secret and all that. And having trained my strength to where I could easily carry limp corpses around, I was finally able to carry out a plan that had been brewing in my brain for quite a while. I found a dead cannibal, tied him to one of their prisoner poles, and hid close by to see if anyone would come to take the bait. Sure enough, the princes began munching down on their own former comrades. Well, the mob eats its own, as they say. Suits me just fine. I was making an absolute killing off of, well, killing. And more bodies means more bait, and more bait means, well, you get the picture. Research was an expensive endeavor, and I'd rather decapitate bad people than go into debt for 20 years. So it's the lesser of two evils, you see. Anyways, with my studies more or less complete, I decided it was high time we put our ideology down on paper so we could enlighten the masses more effectively. Thus, having reinvented the printing press, I had Barth typing away and binding covers while Beep stared in stupefied wonder. Yeah, I'm sure we'll find a good use for him at some point. And having finally put our propaganda to print, which, by the way, propaganda is not inherently bad. In fact, it's a good thing as long as it contains the right message. We began selling it to the denizens of Mongrel at an easily affordable price. Again, the message is what matters, so we wanted to make sure that everybody could get a copy. In fact, I even managed to work up the nerve to bring a copy to Ark. He's the leader of Mongrel, if you don't know. He was a very strong man, a very wise man, and he had the respect of his people. So, yeah, I just wrote this book here. You can have a free copy if you want. Or not. How about I just leave it on the table here for you? Well, gotta go. I think that went well. Maybe he'll read it. Well, fortunately, I didn't have too much time to dwell on it as Hammer got himself kidnapped. And of course, it was up to me to go and rescue him. Which is fine, I suppose. All in a day's work, being the future savior of Hyverkind. Anyways, once Barth ran out of printing materials, it became clear that our work here in Mongrel was done, and we decided it was time to put the city behind us. Farewell, fellow outcasts. May we meet again someday. Of course, the cannibals weren't going to let us leave without a goodbye party, but we had things to do and couldn't afford to stick around for dinner. They almost managed to convince Barth to stay behind, but Razor quickly made some reasonable excuses and wheeled Barth out of there. Some of them even went so far as to see us off at the border of Vane, but, yeah, we were getting kinda sick of their shenanigans and bluntly told them to go home. And so we passed through the Red Valley once again, knowing we wouldn't find any free thinkers among the commercialists. But it did get us to thinking, though, that since Western Hivers seem to enjoy a good watery environment, there might be a fair number of Hive exiles in the Great Swamp to the south. And descending into a giant pool of muck wasn't exactly my idea of a good time, but this was just one of many sacrifices that we had to make for the cause. There in the muck, we discovered a settlement. The locals seemed welcoming enough, so we decided to stop in for a bit. Turned out to be a good place to stock up on Gohan since it was grown locally and therefore sold cheaply. Moving on, we came to what appeared to be the capital of the Great Swamp, a grimy metropolis called Shark. The whole place reeked of hash and fish, but mostly hash. There were 2 bars in town where the townies coalesced, so we decided to check both of them out. The first one was full of ignorant drunkards who made discriminatory remarks against Hivers, so not really my type of joint. The other, it seemed, was actually run by Hivers. They were a bunch of cutthroats, though, who ran the place like a casino, and when someone couldn't pay their dues, they beat the snot out of them. Yeah, the first bar wasn't looking so bad, actually. There I sat down and spoke with an inebriated Hiver named Green. He explained to me that he was a former sharpshooter who lost his team to gang violence. I managed to talk him into signing up with us if we'd pay off his bar tab, and considering it was less than what professional mercenaries usually charge, I'd say we got more than our money's worth with that bargain. It was also just a good idea to have a guy with a ranged weapon for when diplomacy fails. Next, we stopped at the aptly named Mud Town. In the corner of the local bar, we noticed a former Hive Prince who seemed to have worked up a bit of a gambling debt. Now, normally I wouldn't have been interested in having another prince around since, you know, one is enough, but it did occur to me that I could use an administrative assistant, and I didn't really want to watch this poor guy get his legs broken. So yeah, I agreed to pay his debt in exchange for his loyalty. Just remember that I'm the top intellectual around here, and we'll get along fine. And so, having acquired a troupe of alcoholics, gambling addicts, and brainlets, look, you gotta work with what's available, we exited the giant stinkhole in high spirits. Passing into the realm of the desert, we came across a lone, lonely bar, where it seemed that no one could afford anything. What you're looking at is the end result of capitalism, boys. However, on the second floor was a curious merchant named Shady Sand, who claimed to be selling rare blueprints. I'm not sure how rare they actually were, but I figured we'd do well to start crafting our own clothes and armor, so I bought a few. Hitting the road once again, we found ourselves being advanced upon by hungry bandits. Normally I would have just given them a bit of food or money if they'd asked us for it, but unfortunately they went straight for our throats. I thought we could lose them by running into the Deadlands, but apparently they were so hungry they didn't mind charging half naked through skin-melting acid rain. Fortunately, we found a nice pool of acid to dive into, and they were surprisingly smart enough not to do the same. But at this point you might be wondering where the heck we were planning on going anyways. Well, back to the United Cities, of course. By now, they should have forgotten about that whole bank robbing business we got into, and the most likely place we were to find hivers in need of new living circumstances was at the slave market. Arriving at the first slave camp, I was able to buy 2 hive workers out of slavery. One of them decided to join us, and the other went his own way. And you know what? A 50% success rate isn't too bad, all things considered. The next camp wasn't too far away, and upon arriving, I witnessed the samurai guards abusing one of the slaves. Right then, time to free the hivers before their next. 2 out of 3 joined us, which is an even better percentage than last time. And upon visiting one of the local bars, I hired a sellsword named Meathead and bought a slave named Ray from one of the patrons. Unfortunately, he'd had his tongue cut out by a previous owner, and as a result, he couldn't speak. But then again, I wasn't exactly hiring muscle men for the small talk. And our slave purchasing adventure continued to bear fruit. Of course, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. We heard many a dark tale from people who had lost their livelihoods to the taxation of the billionaires, scumsuckers that they were. Now, to their credit, the samurai did protect the people from bandits and the giant, disgusting wingless mosquitoes that plagued the desert, and also provided a decent source of protein, but they're also the ones who drove most of these people to banditry in the first place, including us. This one time, a single basket-head freak managed to take down my entire team, and then some bucket-head-looking dork decided to get in on the action as well. Where were the samurai then? Are we not worth protecting? Is it because we're hivers? Well, whatever. Our assailants did have some decent gear on them, and the basket head in particular had a bounty. So yeah, enjoy slavery, scumbag. Not that we support that kind of thing. A lesson I think we all learned on our journey is that life in the desert kinda sucks. One time we were jumped by one of these giant bloodsuckers, and it managed to bite off Barth's arm before we took it down. But it would take more than a lost arm to make us quit, especially since we finally had enough workers and material resources to start building our new hive. But sadly, it was not yet to be. A bunch of peasants turned bandits mistook us for being filthy capitalists and assaulted us. Most of our new recruits were untrained fighters and had garbage gear, but we did have strength in numbers. Razor was kicking people's faces in as usual, and Barth managed to put up a surprisingly good fight for a guy who just lost an arm. Still, most of us wound up with a face full of sand before we managed to take them down. Then the unluckiest thing in the world happened to us. A group of slave traders came by and began enslaving everybody who had fallen in battle. Then the slavers thought to themselves, hey, why don't we just enslave everyone? So yeah, if we'd had any luck at all left up until this point, it now officially ran out completely. Seeing the battle was already lost, Razor made a run for it with Hammer slung unconscious over his shoulder. I tried to crawl my way out of there, but I got caught. By the time I came to, I couldn't feel my left arm. Razor was lucky enough to find an abandoned village with some useful supplies, so he stayed there and looked after Hammer. Those of us who had been captured were taken on a long, slow march across the sands until we reached a work camp called Port South. Green fell behind on account of a leg injury, which worked out well for him as he was able to slink away unnoticed. The rest of us were thrown in cages like animals to await a life of perpetual hard labor. Still, we were alive, and while we lacked our freedom, we were united by an ideology that the greedy slavers could never hope to understand. And somewhere out there across the sands were 3 hivers with freedom of choice and freed minds. Someday, somehow, we knew they would return for us.